we can take so much pressure off of ourselves when we just say, that's an ugly thing about me, but it is who I am. And I get to choose how I want that thing to show up in my life.
Hello, and welcome to the Grit Unfiltered podcast. I'm your host, Dave Craig, a cancer survivor, caregiver, and a patient experience researcher. Oftentimes, working in healthcare and advocacy, we get to work alongside these incredibly passionate and inspiring individuals, but we don't oftentimes get enough to slow down and understand what shaped them and why they are the people they are today. And so we're going to do that. We have a chance to sit down with a hero that I admire to understand the experiences that shape her and how that influences everything she does to make healthcare and our future brighter. And so with that, Pam Price, I am honored to be together.
Wow, thank you so much, David. I'm actually honored to be here and have this conversation with you. I don't know if I even consider myself in the hero realm for people, so that means a lot to me. Really excited to be here with you today.
The conversations we've had have helped me get to know some things about you, and that's made me want to know more. And so I'm just grateful we get to have this conversation to really dig into what makes Pam Price Pam Price.
Awesome. It's a lot. Buckle up.
I love it. We always say, hold on, it's real, so hold on.
Yes, hold on tight.
So Pam, we've been talking, about some of the things that shape you in your early life and when you were a child. And what are some of those things that stand out to you as being the most significant things that influence who you are?
So one of the very first early memories that I had in my life was also one of the most traumatic experiences, even to date in my life. And it happened when I was around 5 years old. So I don't think I had entered kindergarten or might have just started kindergarten. I grew up in I was born in a very small rural town in Texas. There is still roads that are unpaved to this day in that small town. And so anybody who's ever known or familiar with small towns, everyone knows everybody. And my family was a well known of some of the Black families that lived there, but they were also not liked by the local authorities there. And unfortunately, one of the earlier memories that shaped me that I still carry today actually involved the local sheriff beating my grandfather in front of our entire family. I remember his uniform. I remember his hat. I remember what he wore. I remember his voice. I remember seeing my grandfather, who to me, and even today, even though he's gone, my grandfather he was larger than life. He was just a walking epitome of strength and pride, of love, of protection. Like he was all of that for our family. And as a little girl, who when I was like 2 and 3 would toddle around to get his cowboy boots off of him. And they were so heavy, I'd have to carry them like one at a time, right? So my grandfather was and still is one of my biggest heroes. And to have the memory of my hero on the ground, on the gravel, bloody, being beat, by the sheriff, and then having the sheriff threaten my grandmother. Like I remember her telling, I remember him telling my grandmother that if she did not control that boy of yours, talking about my uncle at the time, who was just a young teen, that she would be burying both her son and her husband. And it stuck with me, one, because it was just so unprovoked. My grandfather hadn't broken any laws. This cop just didn't like my grandfather, and took it upon himself to dish out, this brutal beating. And that shaped how I saw myself in the world. It shaped how I saw police and authority figures in the world. I struggled a lot as a teen growing up with authority. I did not like law enforcement, no matter how or what role they were coming to serve. I remember in the third grade, we would all go to Safety City, which is just tons of police officers teaching children how to be safe in the city where we ride our bikes and how to cross the street safely. And I remember just feeling so uncomfortable. I couldn't find the words at the time, but I was so uncomfortable in that environment. And I felt like I was in danger. And I couldn't pinpoint that, of course, until, you get older and you live a little longer and you start thinking, wow, that's why I felt that way. In high school, we had an amazing, I mean, looking back on it now, he was really awesome. He was the school security guy, our safety officer. And he kept me, if I was somewhere I wasn't supposed to be, he was telling me to go where I was, get to class, basically. you know. So it's, but he was doing it in a nice way. He always joked with us. Um, but I hated him. If I'm being really honest and transparent, and it wasn't him, it was what he represented to me based on that earlier experience. And um, it would take a long time, I think, for me to kind of just work through that and not carry that, to not have the level of anxiousness whenever authorities were around or while I was in the presence of authorities. Um, and as recent as, obviously the George Floyd incident, I remember writing a story about how that was just like ripping that band-aid off of that, because I relived all that. And now I'm reliving it thinking this is how my grandmother maybe felt, right? Because now I have a husband, now I have a son, and I couldn't imagine having to go through that. But I'm looking at what I'm seeing on the TV, and is it really unrealistic that that couldn't happen to my family?
When you were describing that, I could almost feel you looking at the world with 4-year-old eyes and trying to make sense of what this is as a 4-year-old.
Because it's still so in my skin, and still, again, just it's so vivid today. And this is, you're talking about 40 years ago, 40 something years ago. And I cried. I mourned that I felt that there was an innocence lost, because I hadn't seen that level of violence. And then because of who it was being done to, with it being my grandfather, with it being, I didn't grow up with my dad. I often ask, like, would it have been as visceral had it been my dad, who I really didn't know, and I didn't grow up, and my dad didn't raise me, and my grandfather was my father. And I often wonder, would it have been a different reaction had it been a different man in my life, or just a different, person in my life? And I don't know, but I know that, yeah, it was extremely, for a 4-year-old, to the point that, yes, when I finally went to first grade, we moved out of that small little, country hick town and moved to the city, for lack of a better word. Um, and I started first grade there, and there was a security guard who helped us cross the big street every day, and I was afraid of him. And he waved, he spoke, he was really polite, but I was petrified of him. And I look back now and I think about how much of my earlier childhood I spent in fear of law enforcement, and law enforcement was everywhere because I grew up in the project. They were always around, and sometimes not always serving in the best capacity. So while I never saw something as violent as my grandfather being pistol whooped by, this man, I still saw other times when excessive force or unnecessary force was taken on people in and around the community who looked like me. And it didn't matter if it was male or females. I remember my aunts got pulled over one time. We were young, and the cars were a little bit older, maybe about 9 or 10. And same thing, they were, forced to lay on we're in Texas. That concrete is hot. It's summertime, and he made them lay down on the pavement. So it left a bad taste in my mouth for a really, really long time. I'll put it, to put it that way. The second, probably, life changing, life altering. I think that again, it is as much a part of me today as it was back then. And that happened when I was 13. And that was the first time that I attempted suicide. Um, Life was very hard emotionally for me. And I think some of it had to do with just the environment, was just a rough environment. You know, there's no way to kind of cookie cut that or to make it be something that it's not. You know, I was born in 1980. So if we all think that, you know, the crack epidemic was running rampant in the 80s around, you know, this time. My mother, unfortunately, was one of those individuals who actually became addicted to crack. I during all this time, my early preteens and my teenage years, I'm seeing her struggle with this addiction, with a family who didn't know what to do, community that didn't know what to do. And, you know, here I am trying to navigate my way through what at the time seemed like such a dreary, hopeless situation. And I couldn't see anything worth living for on the other side of it. You know, I just kept slipping deeper and deeper and deeper into this void of nothingness. That now on the outside, it didn't appear that way. I thrived at school. I was a straight A student. I took, you know, pride in the fact that my grandfather was like, you know, she's smart as a whip. She got straight A's again, you know. But even in the midst of all of that, or having, you know, him pat me on the back or tell me how proud he was, it was some inner things that didn't line up with that. And eventually it just got too hard to keep that facade up when it didn't line up with kind of how I was feeling on the inside. And so, yeah, when I was 13, my grandfather had a really, really bad back. And so I knew he kept muscle relaxers. I knew where he kept them because I would watch him take them. Sometime I would get them and bring them to him. And that was my plan for this first attempt. And I remember after I took, you know, the whole bottle of those muscle relaxers, I remember climbing into bed, and I probably had one of the best night's sleeps I had had in my life in a long time, because there it was a relief of like, you know. So needless to say, about a week and a half later, when I wake up in the hospital, I'm still here. I'm not a happy camper. And then it didn't help that my family just didn't know what to do. No one talked about it. No one asked why. I got released from the hospital. I went home. I think they had set up one visit for me to see a therapist. They took me to that one visit. I talked to the therapist, but kind of said what I thought was appropriate to say. And I never spoke to anyone else again until I was 19, and now on my own, in the military now at the time, feeling suicidal again, attempting again, and like, okay, now I got to sit down and I got to speak to somebody. But that 13-year-old version of me is such a huge driver. She drives so much of who I am, what I do. You know, so 4-year-old and 13-year-old Pam, I see them. I like to build with them in mind. I like to create programs with them in mind. I like to interact with younger people with them in mind, of saying, what would I want someone to say to that fearful 4-year-old? What would I want someone to say to the lonely, depressed, sad, hopeless 13-year-old Pam? And so I can never like not have them. And again, as horrible as both of those moments were, I look back on them now with a joy and a gratitude, because I know I wouldn't be who I am if I had not experienced those two things.
The times that we've gotten to talk, I just have been in awe about your openness, you know, and comfort, because those things, you know, my mental health, and when I didn't know how much longer I wanted to be alive, just to hear you talk openly about that kind of like makes it easier for me to be like, oh yeah, you know, and to accept and be more open about those. And so I've just always, since we met, been in awe of just, you know, we need to be open to heal those parts of us that felt so alone, right?
100%. it's in the talking and the sharing. Like even though my family, and even now with this is not a topic of big discussion. I've had one aunt who just all she could kind of come up with was that, wow, we didn't know. I wish we had known. And I don't fault my family for it. But I knew eventually that yes, I have to find a way to make sure that this isn't something that I feel ashamed of. Because I think whether it's hopelessness, whether it's fear, we're afraid of something, we're anxious about something, those tend to have a bad kind of connotation connected to us. It's, those are weak emotions. You can't be anxious. You can't be afraid. You can't be sad, or you can't be, these things. And if you are those things, you're just a weak minded individual. When I kind of grasp the concept to say, well, no, I'm actually very much quite the opposite. Do you know how strong it is for me to dig myself up out of that kind of a hole and that kind of a darkness, and then to turn around and look at that darkness and say, you're not going to stop me from being who I am and what I am, and you're just a part of me, and you're here and I see you, but you're not going to, so I think that to me, that is the power in us being able to be honest and to be vulnerable, and to say, no, that really, do I want, would I want my daughters to have the same experience? No. Even though I've come out well on the other side, I really want them to carve out their own journeys, navigate their own troubled waters, so to speak, preferably none that are in the same vein as mine, but I know that if they do, I know that they know, hey, wow, we have a mom, and I've shared this with my oldest. I talked to my 10-year-old who she's an emotional spirit like I am, because she asked me a few weeks ago, Mommy, what do you do when you're sad? As a parent, sometimes I think the knee jerk would have been to make something frou-frou, up. But I wanted to ask her why she wanted to know that. And then I explained to her that in my case, because I have bipolar disorder, so I'm sad sometimes simply because my brain is saying, be sad. And other times I'm sad because, yes, something has happened. And she was like, oh, wow. So, and I told her, so this is what I do. And she was like, okay, I pray too. And then she was like, and I like to draw. And I told her, and mommy likes to write. It's in even that at that age of her being able to say, we can have this conversation about why we're sad. And I never once told her she shouldn't be sad. Don't get sad about, people who have gone on. It was just like, no, that happens and we will be sad. We have to make sure we don't stay sad. So we find something that will help us. So I'm trying to pay that forward, even in my own children and in conversations like we're having today, because I think that's where our power and our strength comes from.
I know for me, I find so much strength when I don't have my own words, in others' words, and seeing people model that strength. And I know last time we talked, something that really affected me was a quote that says, oftentimes the things that we most want to hide about ourselves end up becoming the most beautiful parts of who we are. And I think about how you're turning that into a model for your daughter.
You have to. I think because you can't separate those. I think no matter how hard we try, we really cannot separate those things from who we really are. And I
Yeah.
think the best thing we can do is to really just own it. Like it's so easy to own the good things, the accolades, and you did this well, and but I really own that in my marriage I am not the good one with money. In my marriage I am not often sometimes the best communicator of things. In my marriage, so I think is because I can own them, and I can honestly tell my husband, I suck at that. I'm never going to be good at that thing, and I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I will try. I won't not try, but I'm telling you that it's probably still, even when I give it my best effort, it's not going to come out well because I'm just not good at it. Or that's just, it's not who I am. And I think we can take so much pressure off of ourselves when we just say, that's an ugly thing about me. That's the world may see it as that, but it is who I am. And I get to choose how I want that thing to show up in my life. And I can let it show up and rip my life apart, or I can let it show up and be the glue that holds me together. I can let it show up and be the thing that propels me into what I am most afraid of in life. And I think that's what we don't see it. The ugliness, the messiness, the grimy things, the things we want to keep deepest in our souls and hidden from everything are the things that if we keep them there, they will rip and tear us apart. These masks that you put on, because you have to put a mask on to keep stuff hidden, because you're too afraid somebody's going to see it. So you got to make sure that that mask it's pretty, it's nice, it's fancy, I tell people it's all. I had my mask game was crazy because I didn't want people to know what I was struggling with. But when I tell you, when I finally started to strip those masks off and finally got to just see Pam and all that I am, all that perhaps I can be one day. I mean, I remember I was about maybe 26 and I caught a glimpse of me in the mirror. And by that, I mean, prior to that time, I'm just in the mirror, put makeup on, you're doing your hair, you brush your teeth, I'm not really looking at what looks back. For whatever reason, that morning, I really just caught a glimpse, like my eyes connected to what looked back. And it frightened me because I'm like, I don't even know what that is, let alone who it is. And I remember curling up on my bathroom floor for hours, or what felt like hours, of just bawling my eyes out. I called into work. I picked up the phone. I called my supervisor. I was like, I'm not gonna be able to make it in today. I'm not feeling feeling well. And I remember just laying in that bathroom floor, like I said, for what felt like hours, just crying because I couldn't believe, how did you get so far away that you don't even recognize what just looked back at you? When I got myself up, and I promised, I was like, whatever it takes, however long it takes, you're going to be able to look in that mirror and recognize and like what you see, whatever it is, so that that doesn't happen again. And that is a journey that is an ongoing, everyday kind of journey, to check in with 4-year-old Pam, 13-year-old Pam, 26, all the me's that live in here, and to say, how are we today? What are we going to do today? Which of us is not well today? And how do we pick ourselves up, and how do we carry everything that we bring to the table with us? And I try and bring that into every space. I really try and say, there's something here in this duffel bag that I bring, and I want to bring it into every space that I get to come in here with, because it just may be something I can pull out of here that's going to help someone in this room, in this talk, in this conference, in this meeting. And I think that's why those things are so important for us to know and acknowledge and be okay with.
When I think about Pam as a 4-year-old looking out through, your eyes and the start of all this that has shaped you. And then I think about, when you talk about who you are, you're a mom, you're a nurse, you're an advocate. Um, what is it like to bring all of those experiences into this work now, knowing that other humans are at some point in that journey in their life?
I think for one, it keeps me very grounded and humble. It keeps me mindful that oftentimes what separates, so when, a lot of the advocacy work that I do is in health equity, or inequity rather. And it's sometimes just realizing that the difference between me being on this side of the table, or this side of the microphone, versus the other side, was choice, was opportunity, was prayer, definitely a lot of prayer, because those are very finite flips of a coin. I think it allows me to be able to connect with individuals no matter where we may have come from in life. I think that there is, if we look and we spend time, long enough with people, there's always going to be some common thread that I can look at someone and say, me too. And so to me, that's why I think being able to wear those multiple hats means that I will always be able to find some point of connection for us to be able to then have a dialogue about something and about what we can do together. What change can we make? Or maybe it's not even a change. Maybe it is just us to be able to share. Maybe it is just for me to be able to listen, because maybe no one has sat and really asked you why you're in a certain situation, or asked you genuinely, how are you? And I would like a real response. And I'm open if your response is, I am not well. You want to talk about it? Or you don't, and I think that still catches people off guard. I pause because I typically like to, that's an opportunity you giving me to really check, and how am I? You know, and I hope that you want the real answer, because I am one of the persons who may respond to you and to tell you I'm not doing well today or at the moment. I'm
Please,
struggling a little
please,
bit.
yes, please.
Yeah, now I'm happy to talk about it if you got the time, because it's a free session for me till I can get to my therapist. But since you asked, that is the truth.
Yeah. Whether I think about, my role professionally is as a patient insights or experience researcher. And so my profession is to learn how health and diagnoses affect people. As a survivor and a caregiver, my humanity is drawn to the similarities that we all share from going through this journey. And I guess I've been a survivor now for 20 years and a researcher for 20 years. And as soon as I think I already know something, I'm reminded of how completely wrong I'm going to be, because we can never know what somebody's going through, right? And what you're describing is the empathy to listen.
Yeah, because like you said, because we don't have all the answers. I think sometimes that's thinking of other hats that I wear, right? So we've created this, we've let the data tell us, that a community or a group of people that, they're experiencing X, Y, and Z. And so we need to come in and we're going to provide this, right? This awesome program. It's evidence-based, whatever evidence-based means to us. And like you said, and not one time did somebody think, have we talked to this group of people first to even ask, is this something they need? Is it something that they want? Is it something that they're even ready to receive? Because I think sometimes, we talk about meeting people where they are. We oftentimes mean that geographically. Are they rural versus urban? Are they low income versus, something else? So we're thinking across it in that lines. We're really not thinking about it in a mental plane, right? Are they mentally in a place where they can even receive the information, where they can not just receive, but can I then apply it? Because if you're giving me something and I'm not ready, or I don't have the skill set to apply it, this is something that in everything I have in my life, as much as I might appreciate receiving it from you, I can't keep it. I can't retain it because I don't have the tools to do something with it. So I'm just going to have to let that go because I got so many other things that I'm trying to carry. Navigating many different things in my life. I think that's also been helpful to me to know, to say, we have to, there's a couple of different tech boxes that we sometimes don't see, that we have to make sure that when we're talking about people and helping, and we're talking about disparities and equities, some of the drivers behind them are so traumatic and so present in people's lives today. And it has left psychological scars that no matter what we build and how great it is, they cannot use and benefit from it because mentally they are not ready to do so.
When we think about individuals finding their voice, and to be able to share what those experiences are, um, how do you think about, or what is it like to see that in the work that you do, seeing somebody find their voice to be able to express what those things are?
Um, it's a really beautiful and almost semi-spiritual thing, I think, to see it translate to someone else. I I don't like speaking in public. Like, if people really knew that, I really If someone ever strapped like the Holter monitors where you can see, see and hear the heart rate, mine would be through the roof because I don't like, I'm always really kind of just this big ball of nerves and I'm anxious, but I understand the responsibility I have in having gone and lived through the things that I have. I think it would be very selfish of me not to be able to share with people how and what I did to get through it. And so that's one. I think it's selfish of us, if we are survivors of anything in life, to not find some way to share some parts of your journey, because you did not go through that thing just for your sole benefit. I'm a fervent believer that those of us who have been blessed to survive things in life, we're called to then share what, how did you shift your mindset? How did you talk to your family? How do you, get with loved ones? And it's in us giving the how to, that now other individuals can then say, okay, I can take a little bit of how David got through his. Pam said she, pulled it. So then now you can start to weave your own. And then within that, you can say, okay, now this is how I can talk about it. This is how and we can talk about it in so many different ways. You can write, there's artistry, there's music. It's figuring out that way to say this thing that wants to stay hidden, this thing that doesn't really want to come out, this thing that you're going to have people who are going to tell you, don't share that. They're going to think you crazy. You're not going to get a job. No one's going to want to hire, like I've heard all of that. Like, you can't share that. My husband, I was like, please don't share that. I'm like, no, I really think I need to share that. Like, I think that's going to help somebody. He was like, well, maybe you don't have to help everybody. And I was like, no, this is for who it's meant for. And everybody else, they'll be fine. You know, and so it's really in, I think, saying, okay, what space within my journey and in my story do I own and do I want to tell? Because if you don't, somebody else will. And are they going to tell it the right way? So I think that's another, a second thing too, is that if we don't find our voices to tell our own stories, other individuals will tell them for us. And they typically will not tell them accurately. Being able to do that allows us, from generation to generation storytelling has always been a part of every culture. And we have to make sure that in health spaces, in research, in science, in every facet, that we're saying there are stories that have to be told. And if you came through this horrible thing and you're clean and you're shiny and finally on the other side, tell someone how you got all that dirt off. And so for me, it's just saying, I came out, okay, here's what I did. It may work, it may not work, but it helped me, and maybe it'll help you. And I think, yeah, that's how we make sure that we can break things from generation to generation.
We've gotten to, you've shared with us, to look out as 4-year-old Pam. And I could really feel you in that 4-year-old space as Pam. And to hear you now with all of these experiences that shape you, I really get a sense for why I see what I see when I see you work as an advocate and all these things, because all those things have shaped who you are. We talked about how much music and faith are a part of the strength for you. And so to close this conversation, what do you want to share just about how much the words or the meaning or the music in both of those things mean to you?
Again, because faith is really, really important, to me, as has always been,
Mhm.
um, that we know and we're taught, at least in Christian faith, that the power of life and death lies in the power of the tongue. So I can speak life or I can speak death. That speak could then be translated into what I write and put on paper, could be translated into what we put out in music and what we put out in poetry. I love Langston Hughes, his Crystal Stair poem. I actually read that at my mother's funeral because that was one of her favorite poems. Because to me, I'm reminded that life for me ain't been no crystal stair. There are, I love scriptures that remind me of who I am in the moments when life is trying to tell me the opposite, when life is trying to tell me that I'm not meant to do this work, that I have been wonderfully and marvelously made. And I think it's keeping those things somewhere tucked in our minds. And it could be something that your grandmother, a grandparent, someone who you admire has spoken into you. I challenge everyone to remember those things, write those things down, put them somewhere so that you can see them. If you go through my work bag, my purse, my pocketbook, people be like, okay, is she struggling to remember certain things? Or is she, like, what is all, I got stuff written on the back of receipts, sticky notes. I have folded up letters of what things have spoken, to me that I'm like, I want to remember that. I write it down and I take it and I tuck it. It's in books, it's in Bibles, it's in the 10,000 journals I've kept over my life, because it's just a constant reminder, again, of where I've come from, where I am, but also where I have the potential to go. And I think music and writing things down allows us to constantly remember those things. And if the music is really good, we can also dance and have a good time to
Yes, yes, please to that too.
it. Much for yeah, huge love music. I can't think of one genre of music that I do not. If you look at my playlist, you're like, wow, I'm into everything.
I love it. If I think about the two things that I've felt from our conversation together, it's that believing in your voice or just finding the way to start letting things out is really the starting point of everything that comes after. And I could really feel you in those moments of you finding your voice to take those steps. And then the other thing that I feel so strongly too from our conversation is that, oftentimes we have traveled different roads, and being able to take a second and say, this is something very different than what I've experienced. I want to understand that because it'll connect with part of me. And have felt both of you those so strongly in our conversation together.
That's it. I mean, you hit it. It's we're all headed somewhere, right? And some of our paths are going to cross. Um, but we're on a path, right? We're on a journey. We're headed to a destination. That destination is going to have hills, valleys, rocky roads, paved roads, good, like all of that if we live long enough. At least that's what my grandmother said. We just have to keep living. And so I think, yeah, when you're like, okay, wow, I got through that. I stubbed my toe a little bit. But I'm okay. I'm still standing, or maybe I'm not, but I can get back up. And it's looking over at someone else in their path, and maybe it's saying, maybe let me go over here and help them. So I think it's always just seeing ourselves in other people. I try to see me in everybody that I get an opportunity to interact with. And I hope people can look at me and say, I see a little bit of me in her, or, that in her resonated somewhere in me. Because I think that's how we can see that we're all really connected in this thing called life.
Those are the perfect words to wrap our conversation. So, Pam, for everything that you've shared about your journey, I know that I will take pieces that will influence who I am for the rest of my life. And I hope for everybody else that gets to share in your journey, they have those pieces that help them feel more of who they most want to be. So, thank you.
Thank you.